Our next section is fluid and electrolyte disorders. Let's start out first with hyponatremia and a low sodium. Low sodium can be very hard for people, very difficult, because they get inverted in their brain. The first thing about a low sodium that we have to look at is we have to say, gee, is this hypervolemic? In other words, is this person showing evidence of congestive failure, cirrhosis, cirrhotic? Is this person showing evidence of cirrhosis, nephrotic, cirrhosis, nephrotic, cirrhosis, nephrosis, and CHF? Is this person hypovolemic? Hypovolemic. Volume status low. Low volume status. Or are they good or true or normal? That's where we get the word euvolemic. Eu from the Greek word for good, true, or normal. Well, I see these things here about water retention or sodium loss. Yeah, that's kind of like, spend less, save more, whatever. The whole point is that when you have a low sodium, automatically you see the osmolality? The osmolality is low. As a matter of fact, if your glucose and BUN are normal, you see this? Osmolality is 2 times the sodium plus 10. That's really saying that serum sodium is osmolality. The vast majority of osmolality is a serum sodium. So when you see hyponatremia, you should be thinking osmolality is low. Low sodium, low osmolality. Now, the presentation of low sodium and high sodium is all neurological. The symptoms of sodium disorders are all central nervous system, not even peripheral nervous system, but central nervous system. Now, central nervous system symptoms in all of them. That's a high sodium gives us CNS problems and a low sodium gives us CNS problems. It's the same for all of them. Sodium, CNS. Now, what's the worst sodium symptoms? Seizures. Sodium cells seizures by the CNS shore. Is that a high sodium selling seizures by the CNS shore? Or low sodium selling seizures by the CNS shore? Both. High or low causes CNS. And not only that, if you correct the high down or bring the low up too fast, you get more CNS symptoms. How about that? Sodium CNS. Can you get a CNS problem from potassium? No, because you're going to die of an arrhythmia first. You will die of an arrhythmia before you can get a seizure from a potassium problem. You'll die of an arrhythmia first. Now, this thing about mild, moderate, and severe, you'll notice it doesn't say a sodium level. Mild is not defined as a particular sodium. Mild is defined as what's the symptoms. Mild hyponatremia means essentially, the word mild means no symptoms. If you have a low sodium, no matter how low it is, as long as there's no symptoms, as long as there is no symptoms, you have mild. As long as there is no symptoms. As long as there is no symptoms, you have mild sodium disorder. And that means you just restrict fluids, it'll come back up. With severe, no matter what the sodium level is, if you're seizing, it's severe. So that means I once saw a guy with a sodium of 110, he had no symptoms. It was mild, he was on fluid restriction. I saw somebody with a sodium of 120 and they were seizing, it was severe. So mild, moderate, and severe is based on the symptoms, not the sodium level. If you bring up the sodium level too fast, your pons melts. What does too fast mean? Well, it's kind of like how fast you run or walk when you're on fire. You know what I mean? If you're walking down the street, you're strolling, that's fast enough. If you're on fire, that's too slow. If your sodium level is low and you have no symptoms, you could bring it up 12 points a day. If your sodium level is low and you're having seizures, you should bring it up 24, 36 points a day, 1 or 2 points an hour. No symptoms, bring it up a half a point an hour. Very severe symptoms, bring it up 1 to 2 points an hour. Depends how bad your symptoms are. Well, when you give sodium chloride, normal saline, you're giving salt and water. The diuretic makes you lose the water. When you're giving normal saline, you're giving them salt and water. Here, the loop diuretics, you're making them lose the water. You're making them lose the water. Okay? Lose the water. Now let's see here. Pseudo-hyponatremia, well, anything pseudo means it can't be real, right? So that means the sodium level really is normal. Well, these are different ways of saying the same thing. Pseudo-hyponatremia means the sodium level is really low. So if the sodium level is low in the test, it must mean it's not real. The number one reason for this, for the number one reason for pseudo-hyponatremia is that for every 100 points above normal of glucose, there is a 1.6 point drop in the sodium. You ready? It has to do with this. This is a blood vessel. When you have a very high glucose, inside that bloodstream, when you have a very high blood glucose in that bloodstream, what happens to the osmolality of what's in the bloodstream? When you have a very high glucose inside the bloodstream, what happens to your osmolality in there? Gets higher, concentrated. Too sweet. Ask any 10-year-old about making rock candy. They put sugar in, melt it around, they increase the glucose content until eventually you put a string in there, you make rock candy. Hyperosmolar. What will happen to the amount of water in here if the vascular space becomes hyperosmolar? Water will start to get drawn in here. Well, what happens is that water starts to get drawn in there because the hyperosmolar state. Now, since the amount of sodium in there is fixed, what happens is that when all this water comes into the vascular space, it doesn't bring sodium with it. So what happens, the glucose level goes up. It sucks water into the vascular space. Since it doesn't bring sodium with it, the sodium level goes down because the water's coming in. The amount of sodium in the vascular space is normal, but the answer is fix the glucose. When you fix the glucose, the water will go back out. Pseudo-hyponatremia. Hyperlipidemia is an old archaeologic, not very important cause of pseudo. That's basically all based on old flame spectrophotometers that would mismeasure the sodium level. Hypervolemic causes. Hypervolemic causes is cirrhosis, nephrosis, and CHF. Cirrhotic, nephrotic, and CHF. What would happen with these is that there's a perception of intravascular volume depletion. There's a perception of intravascular volume depletion. There's a perception of intravascular volume depletion. There's a perception of intravascular volume depletion because there is intravascular volume depletion. So what happens? The osmolar and pressure receptors in the carotid body perceives low volume. And what happens? It sends a message. Hey, hypothalamus, hey, make us some ADH. And it squirts out the posterior pituitary because it's intravascular volume decrease. So the hypothalamus makes more ADH, which goes into your posterior pituitary, out in the bloodstream. More ADH. These are, in fact, the appropriate increase in antidiuretic hormone because the body has to make a decision. What's more important? Volume status or dropping the sodium level? Volume status or dropping the sodium level? Volume status or dropping the sodium level? And the answer is the volume status is more important. What's more important? The volume status is more important. The volume status is more important. What's the difference? The volume status is more important. That's what's different. Okay? Now, so therefore, hypervolemic, cirrhosis, nephrosis, and CHF is really the appropriate increase in ADH. It's appropriate. Why? Well, they're intravascularly volume depleted. Let's raise the ADH level. Now, dehydration, vomiting, diarrhea, sweating, these are all reasons that you're intravascularly volume depleted, and what happens is that the body wants to retain volume. And part of how it retains volume is it retains sodium. So if you're dehydrated and vomiting and diarrhea, you're kidneys retain sodium as part of the way that you're going to retain volume. So the urine sodium is low because we want to retain sodium. Fractional excretion of sodium will be low. But here with diuretics, part of the reason that diuretics work is diuretics work by inhibiting sodium and chloride reabsorption. Diuretics work by inhibiting sodium and chloride reabsorption. Salt wasting. Well, I guess that name says it all. You're losing salt in the kidney. Addison disease. Well, Addison's, what does aldosterone do? Aldosterone makes you retain sodium and excrete hydrogen ions. Aldosterone makes you retain sodium and excrete hydrogen ions. Aldosterone makes you retain sodium and excrete hydrogen ions. So therefore, if you have no aldosterone, you're going to lose sodium. You're going to lose sodium because aldosterone makes you retain sodium. That's why people with Addison's disease walk around being weak, saying, can I have a jar of pickle juice? Can I have some salty pretzels? Can I have a jar of pickle juice? Very salty. Pickle juice jar? Looking to do salty stuff. Hyponatremia, pseudo-psycho-SIADH. Why do you get hypothyroidism causing hyponatremia? Man, I have no idea why hypothyroidism causes hyponatremia. It's just one of those things that happens. Okay? Psychogenic polydipsia. How much water do you have to drink a day to get psychogenic polydipsia? How much a day? Wow, tons. How much a day? Wow, tons. 28-year-old guy with a history of bipolar disorder on lithium. Bipolar disorder on lithium is drinking 18 liters per day. And he's urinating 18 liters per day. And his sodium is normal at 140, exactly 140. Well, is this psychogenic polydipsia from his bipolar? Or is this nephrogenic diabetes insipidus from lithium? And the answer is, you can't tell. If this sodium was low, this would be psychogenic polydipsia. If the sodium was low, okay? If the sodium level was low, it would be psychogenic polydipsia. If the sodium level were high, it'd be nephrogenic diabetes insipidus on the basis of the lithium. Because the sodium level is normal. Because the sodium level is normal. Because the sodium level is normal, the answer is that you can't tell. Psychogenic polydipsia, I dilute myself out. Now, which of these will have a high urine volume? All of them. But which of these will have a low urine osmolality? Which will have a low urine osmolality means a dilute urine, a very watery urine. Which of these will have a low urine osmolality, a watery dilute urine? The answer is both of them. Both of them. Which of these will have a low urine sodium? The answer is both of them. Oh, both of them. Matter of fact, if you show me a high volume urine with high osmolality and high sodium, I'll show you a dead person. By definition, high volume urines have to be low osmolality, have to be low sodium. Nocturia. That's the key. Now, water deprivation test is a test you could do. But you could just ask the person, hey, listen, after you go to sleep, do you stop peeing? If the guy goes, no, I don't stop peeing. I pee all night, all right with me. I'm up every hour, peeing, peeing, peeing. It's nephrogenic diabetes insipidus. Because when he goes to sleep, he can't stop peeing. But psychogenic polydipsia goes away after you go to sleep. Psychogenic polydipsia goes away after you go to sleep. Because when you stop drinking, you stop peeing. So, euvolemic, pseudo-psycho-SIADH, pseudo-psycho-SIADH, SIADH. What causes the syndrome of inappropriate SIADH? Pseudo-psycho-SIADH, very important. CNS, what in the brain will cause you to have SIADH? A stroke, a tumor, a trauma, a meningitis, an encephalitis, a brain abscess. Anything. What causes you to have SIADH in the brain? Anything in the brain, from a stroke to tumor to trauma to sperm emboli. Anything can cause you to have CNS abnormalities. What in the lung can cause SIADH? Pneumonia, TB, bronchitis, bronchiectasis, lung abscess, sarcoidosis. It is atelectasis, pneumothorax. It is anything. Any lung, any brain, drugs, and cancer. Any lung, any brain, and drugs, and cancer. Any lung, any brain, and drugs, and cancer. Any lung, anything in the lung, anything in the brain. Medications like SSRIs. Medications like SSRIs. Medications like SSRIs. Medications, meds like SSRIs. Any lung, any brain, drugs, and cancer. Now, a normal person, if they had a sodium that was low, a normal person, when you had this low sodium, means automatically a low osmolality. A normal person should have a urine osmolality and a urine sodium. A normal person should make what type of urine sodium if you got a low serum sodium? High or low for a normal person? The answer is, if I don't have sodium, I shouldn't be pissing it away. A normal person should make a low urine sodium. Low sodium, low osmolality. Low sodium, low osmolality. Low. Low. Now, he wants to get rid of water. An SIADH person. An SIADH person. An SIADH person. An SIADH person, this is exactly the problem. This is the defect. Instead of making a urine sodium that's low, they're making a urine sodium that's inappropriate high. They got no sodium, but they're pissing it off. That's abnormal. That's inappropriate. That's inappropriate. A low urine sodium. Well, we said, a serum sodium. Well, we said that sodium, serum osmolality, is basically equal to 2 times the sodium plus 10. If you have a low serum sodium, you should have a urine osmolality that's low, but instead they have a urine osmolality that's high, and that's the diagnosis. You ready? SIADH is defined as a urine osmolality greater than a serum osmolality in the presence of hyponatremia. That's actually entirely the issue here. It's a urine osmolality greater than a serum osmolality in the presence of hyponatremia. That's the disaster. Now, the most accurate test is the ADH level. However, you can tell right away by finding the urine sodium, the urine osmolality, most accurate ADH level. Now, hypernatremia. Well, what happens with hypernatremia is that hypernatremia is anything that causes you to have skin, urine, or GI loss of fluid. Skin, urine, or GI loss of fluid. That's skin, urine, or GI loss of fluid. Okay? That's skin, urine, or GI loss of fluid. Okay? So skin, urine, or GI loss of fluid. Now, if I lost skin, urine, and GI, and I replaced with free water over time, these things could actually cause hyponatremia. But without free water replacement, they cause hypernatremia. You go out and you urinate like crazy today, you get hypernatremic. Now, hypernatremia is without free water replacement. Now, in addition to these is diabetes insipidus. In addition to these is diabetes insipidus. And diabetes insipidus is exactly the opposite of SIADH. Diabetes insipidus is exactly the opposite of SIADH because you don't have enough. You don't have enough ADH. So, well, hypernatremia, predominantly neurologic. Why? Sodium CNS. High sodium CNS, low sodium CNS. Sodium CNS. And if you correct the sodium too quickly, again, sodium CNS. Sodium CNS. High sodium CNS and low sodium CNS. Sodium CNS. Sodium CNS for all of them. Okay. Now, if you have a person who's getting dehydrated, dehydration means the serum osmolality is rising. The serum osmolality is rising. Your urine volume. What should happen to a urine volume in a normal person as the serum osmolality rises? What happens to your volume of pee-pee when you're dry? Do you make more pee-pee? Do you pee-pee more when you're dry, or do you pee-pee less? I hope you went to medical school to learn this one. Guess what I learned today in school, Mom? When I'm dry, I pee-pee less. A normal person should pee-pee less. Well, the whole point is a person with diabetes insipidus, his pee-pee, he makes so much pee-pee. He's getting all pissed off, even though he's getting dehydrated. That's diabetes insipidus. And it tastes, the taste is not so sweet. So I turned myself for ADH, and I caught a glimpse of giving ADH. Okay, give ADH, and what happens if it's a drop in the volume? The taste is not so sweet. It's insipidus, insipid, bland, insipid. Okay, ADH. You give ADH. Which one of these drops the urine volume in response to ADH? Which one drops the urine volume in response to ADH? And the answer is a central diabetes insipidus. Now, a central diabetes insipidus, what causes central diabetes insipidus? Central diabetes insipidus is caused by a stroke, a tumor, a trauma, hypoxia, histiocytosis X, tuberculosis, anything that destroys your hypothalamus. My hypothalamus got destroyed, I got central DI. My hypothalamus got destroyed, I got central DI. That management is easy. Hey doc, I don't have enough ADH. Give ADH. Hey doc, it hurts when I do that. What do I do? Don't do that. Hey doc, it hurts when I don't have enough ADH. What do I do? Have some ADH. Now, nephrogenic diabetes insipidus, the whole point is you give them antidiuretic hormone, and a nephrogenic diabetes insipidus, the nephrogenic diabetes insipidus does not change. Now, nephrogenic diabetes insipidus is a tough thing. The main thing about nephrogenic diabetes insipidus is that hypokalemia and hypercalcemia cause it. This is part of the reason that people with hypercalcemia present with a massive dehydration. People with hypercalcemia present with a massive dehydration because their kidney don't concentrate. Did you hear me? Concentrate, concentrate, concentrate your urine. They don't concentrate. So you got to fix the electrolyte problems. And I hate to say this, other than that, you're stuck in the very difficult position called giving a diuretic to someone who is urinating 18 liters a day. Ooh, does even Dr. Fisher have the Leydig and Sertoli cells to give a diuretic to someone urinating 18 liters a day? Oh my goodness! Non-steroidals inhibit prostaglandins. And that takes less Leydig and Sertoli cells to give non-steroidals. When you give those non-steroidals and inhibit prostaglandins, it can fix the kidney. Sodium, CNS, high sodium CNS, low sodium CNS. If you correct it too quickly, high or low, you get CNS problems again. Hypernatremia, skin, urine, or GI loss. Hypernatremia it's none of those things, it's diabetes insipidus. If you give ADH, the volume goes down in central. If you give ADH, the volume won't go down in nephrogenic. Central diabetes insipidus. I don't have enough ADH. Give them some ADH. Nephrogenic, diuretics actually get a little more residual concentrating ability out of the kidney. Can actually get some residual concentrating. Amazing. We are in the amazing business. Now, hypokalemia, our next subject. Our next subject is a potassium. Well, for potassium problems, let's look at what controls potassium. Let's work at what controls potassium. Let's look at what moves potassium in and out of the cell. Let's look at what moves potassium in and out of the cell. Okay? Potassium, potassium. Let's look at what moves that potassium in and out of the cell. Well, first thing we find is that if you give insulin, insulin drives potassium into the cells with glucose. So what we find is that if you give increased insulin, it drives potassium into the cells. That's why increased insulin is a way of causing hyponatremia and therefore is a treatment for hyperkalemia. If you have decreased insulin, also known as diabetes, this is a way of the potassium level going up because insulin drives potassium into cells. What controls potassium moving in and out of those cells? What controls potassium moving in and out of those cells? Well, what we see here is the sodium-potassium ATPase drives potassium into the cells and takes the sodium out. Drives potassium into the cells and takes the sodium out. So anything that makes that sodium-potassium ATPase work more will drive potassium into cells. Anything that is a beta agonist increases the action of the sodium-potassium ATPase. If you increase the action of the sodium-potassium ATPase, if you increase the action of the sodium-potassium ATPase, if you increase the action of the sodium-potassium ATPase, if you increase the action of the sodium-potassium ATPase, you drive potassium into cells. If you block the sodium-potassium ATPase, the potassium builds up outside the cells. Now, what other drug works by inhibiting that sodium-potassium ATPase? What other drug works by inhibiting that sodium-potassium ATPase? And the answer is digoxin. Works by blocking that sodium-potassium ATPase. Okay. Now, what else moves potassium in and out of the cells? The answer is acid-base. If you have an alkalosis, hydrogen ions come out of the cell. If you have an alkalosis, hydrogen ions come out of the cell. If you have an alkalosis, hydrogen ions come out of the cell and potassiums will go in. One cation out, a cation, hydrogen ion, one cation out, one cation in, one cat in, one cat out. If you give bicarbonate, you cause an alkalosis and drive potassium into the cells. If you develop an acidosis, potassium will go the other way around. Potassium will go the other way around. Okay? Now, these are the three big cellular mechanisms. The other one I want you to notice is this. Did you notice that most of the potassium is inside the cells? 95% of it's inside the cells. That means anything that causes lysis or destruction of tissues, tumor lysis, hemolysis, rhabdomyolysis, hemolysis, tumor lysis, rhabdomyolysis will cause hyperkalemia. Now, tissue formation, very unusual, But B12 and folate replacement can cause such rapid production of cells as to cause hypokalemia. The last thing is Conn's syndrome, Cushing's syndrome. If you increase aldosterone, aldosterone drives excretion of potassium. If you decreased aldosterone, which is to say Addison's disease, you increase potassium. Addison's is because aldosterone makes you retain sodium and excrete potassium and hydrogen ions. If you don't have aldosterone, you retain hydrogen ions. Aldosterone, Conn's, Cushing's, licorice. What happens is that all this extra aldosterone makes you excrete potassium. Well, let's look at our tape here. GI loss of potassium, yeah, particularly from the colon. The colon is a potassium excreting organ. Aldosterone makes you retain sodium and excrete hydrogen ions. So if you have extra aldosterone, you're going to excrete potassium. If you have extra aldosterone, you're going to excrete potassium. Barter's syndrome is like being on Lasix all the time. Barter's syndrome is a genetic abnormality where you're having a loop of Henle loss of sodium and chloride all the time. Loop of Henle loss is sodium and chloride all the time. Cushing's, Conn's, licorice, Barter's is all 4 different ways of saying increased aldosterone. Magnesium. Are you aware of the fact that there are magnesium-dependent potassium channels in the kidney? There are magnesium-dependent potassium channels inside the kidney. There are magnesium-dependent potassium channels inside the kidney. Okay? There's magnesium-dependent potassium channels inside the kidney. Okay? That means if you have low magnesium, you're going to have a huge urinary loss of potassium. If you have low magnesium, you're going to have a huge urinary loss of potassium. If you have low magnesium, you're going to have a huge urinary loss of potassium. Okay? Muscle and heart weakness is because how do you die of potassium disorders? Kalemic cardiac. Hyperkalemic cardiac, hypokalemic cardiac, kalemic cardiac. Kalemic, high and low potassium, both can kill you. Low potassium gives you U waves. Let's look at a U wave. Low potassium is a U wave. Let's look at a U wave. Me wave? No, U wave. P, Q, R, S, T, ooh. P, Q, R, S, T, ooh. The U wave is an extra wave after the T wave indicating Purkinje fiber repolarization. It means you're also going to die of a potassium disorder. Hyperkalemia, P, Q, R, S, T, but the T is ow, pointy, peaked, hurt me. That T wave hurts, daddy. Peak T waves. Peak T waves, peak T waves. Treatment for hyperkalemia peak T waves? Calcium chloride. Calcium chloride. Let's look at this. Hypokalemia. What is the maximum oral dose of potassium? The maximum oral, there is no maximum oral dose of potassium because the GI tract cannot absorb potassium faster than your urine can excrete it. So if I give you too much, your kidney can excrete it faster than your gut can absorb it. Your kidney can excrete it faster than your gut can absorb it. Your kidney can excrete it faster than your gut can absorb it. So therefore, the kidney will not get overwhelmed. The kidney can't get overwhelmed by oral ingestion. The reason that the maximum oral IV rate, the maximum IV rate is 10 to 20 milliequivalents an hour is because there's no time to block absorption. There's no time for the kidney to excrete it. There's a maximum IV rate because you'll cause an arrhythmia. There's a maximum IV rate because you'll cause an arrhythmia. The oral dose, ready? Here's another part of it. See this? 4 to 5 milliequivalents an hour. Dr. Fisher here, I'm exactly 100 kilograms. It would take 400 milliequivalents to raise my total body by 1 point. Now you see where at the bottom it says, do not use IV dextrose containing solutions? Dextrose provokes insulin. Insulin will drive the potassium intracellularly. Don't use dextrose-containing solutions because it drives potassium intracellularly. Don't use dextrose-containing solutions because it drives potassium intracellularly. Maximum IV dose, 10 to 20 milliequivalents an hour. What? You get an arrhythmia, man. You get peak T waves and you're dead. Shuffled off this mortal coil to that undiscovered country whence no traveler returns. Raw. IV. Oral, there, don't worry about it. The gut can't absorb it faster than your potassium, faster than your kidney can excrete it. The other thing is this, remember, dextrose provokes insulin, and insulin will drive the potassium intracellularly. Hyperkalemia. It's the same thing we said here. Cellular shifts. Pseudohyperkalemia. Pseudohyperkalemia is when I leave your tourniquet on too long, or I leave the cells inside a tube, and the cells lyse. And when those cells lyse, they cause a hyperkalemia. Acidosis causes a transcellular shift. Insulin deficiency doesn't drive the potassium inside. Periodic paralysis can both be hyperkalemic and hypokalemic. Periodic paralysis means the potassium should go up and down and all around, and I don't know why. We don't know why. Periodic paralysis can be hyper or hypokalemic. It results in muscular weakness, and I just don't know why. Nobody knows why it occurs. But we do know this. Aldosterone makes you excrete potassium. And if you have no aldosterone, you're going to lose potassium. Hyperkalemia happens with muscular and cardiac. Muscular and cardiac. How do you die? Potassium kills you with muscular and cardiac. Muscular and cardiac. If you have peak T waves, the best initial therapy is potassium treatment is with calcium chloride and calcium gluconate. Calcium chloride and calcium gluconate does not lower potassium levels in the blood. Calcium chloride and calcium gluconate protect the heart. Calcium chloride and calcium gluconate protect the heart. Calcium chloride and calcium gluconate protect the heart. Bicarbonate drives the potassium intracellularly. Glucose and insulin drives the potassium intracellularly. Diuretics and beta agonists take too long. Emergency management of hyperkalemia. Calcium chloride and calcium gluconate, followed by insulin and glucose. K-exolate removes the potassium from your body. Remember, out of all these things, calcium chloride, bicarb, glucose, and insulin, none of these top three things actually remove potassium into your body. Calcium chloride and calcium gluconate protect the heart. Insulin and bicarb, transcellular shift. K-exolate removes it from your body. Now that's the end of the fluid and electrolyte section. Sodium is hard for people because SIDH gets confused with diabetes insipidus. SIDH is any brain, any lung, drugs and cancer. Any brain, any lung, drugs and cancer. Diabetes insipidus can also be anything in the brain. Strokes, tumor, trauma, hypoxia. But the big difference is this. SIDH is a low sodium. Diabetes insipidus is a high sodium. You're going to have to do this stuff 2 or 3 times at least. If you have not studied this before, and remember, I know this isn't review for many of you. You cannot review what you never knew. Play it again. Pause me. Read it again. Read it again. You're going to have to do it over and over again. Get some other books. Go to the bookstore. Sit in the medical bookstore. Read the same subject that's a pain for you, like sodium. Read it in 3 or 4 textbooks and see which one is palatable to you. See which one is palatable and easiest for you to absorb. And that's how you know which one to get. How do I know which one to get? Read several books and see which one is the most palatable to you. Me, you know you can't lose me. You know you're going to see me again. Don't worry, I'll call. I'll see you in the next clip, okay? Goodbye, baby. Bye.